Thank you. I call this meeting to order of the Subdivision and Appeal Board. My name is Graham Locke, and I will be chair for this hearing. All questions and comments would be appreciated if they would go through the chair. I'd ask the board members to identify themselves as well, starting with Mr. Bell.
Hello, my name's Jim Bell, and I'm a public member of the board.
And I am Harry Scott, and I'm also a public member of the board.
And the clerk for this meeting is Ms. Katie Bravo Stewart. Before introducing the appeal, I'd now ask each of the town's administration staff to introduce themselves, please.
Jolene Noel, Meeting Administrator.
Thank you, Ms. Noel.
Eric Bjorgi, I'm a planning technician and development officer for this file.
Thank you, Mr. Bjorga.
I'm Marcus Henry. I'm the supervisor of the planning department.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Are there any others? Are there any others that wish to be identified as part of the town staff? Nope. Thank you very much. We have before us an agenda, and I wonder if there are any additions, deletions, or changes to that agenda, Ms. Stewart.
There are none presented by administration.
None from the board members? Thank you. Now there are some minutes for two hearings held earlier in May that are attached to as part of the agenda. And are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the minutes of the appeal hearing dated May the 5th? I would assume at this time, by this time, all members of the board and so on should have addressed those changes if there were any changes, wouldn't they?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So they were circulated to all the members that were present at those meetings. So I received some comments back, but generally I haven't received anything else, so they should be good to go.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Bravo Stewart. Mr. Bjorga?
Don't mind me, I'm just uploading something to prepare.
Okay. Thank you. So that would apply to both sets of minutes then, Ms. Bravo Stewart, is that correct?
That's correct.
So one motion for two will work?
You can do two separate motions.
Okay. Okay, then perhaps we could have a motion from one of the board members to accept the May and adopt the May 5th minutes of the SDAB hearing, May 5th.
Harry Scott, I will adopt or motion to adopt the minutes from May 5th.
And all in favor? And could I have another motion to approve the May 31st minutes of that appeal hearing?
Jim Bell, I move that the minutes of May 31, 2022 be adopted.
And all in favor? Thank you very much. The appeal before us is PL 2022-0047 pertaining to an attached garage and storage addition to an existing dwelling, an appeal against refusal by the development officer. I would now ask I guess the appellates still aren't online, I take it, so they are online? Oh, good. Then perhaps I could now ask the appellate or appellates to identify themselves.
Good afternoon. I don't know if you can see me, but my name is David Burkhardt. I'm representing myself with respect to the attached garage.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. Have you received a copy of the agenda package that has been distributed to the board, and do you have any objections to any of the information provided?
I received the documents and I do not have any objections.
You received the document and what?
And I do not have any objections.
Thank you very much. So the hearing will go as follows. Administration will first make a summary of the presentation on the matter before the board, and then we'll get to ask those folks questions. And then, Mr. Bjorkart, you then will speak in favor of the appeal and any background you'd like us to be aware of. And then, of course, we would ask questions of you. I take it there are no others with you that will represent other support for the matter?
No, unfortunately, my wife is working, so I'm on my own.
Well, that allows me to skip a few steps in the speaking notes.
Yes.
Then once we have completed the information from both the staff and from Mr. Burkhardt, the board may then ask for a short recess, depending on the complexity. But I don't believe we'll need that today. And then we'll ask for clarification or closing remarks from yourself, Mr. Burkhardt. Any closing remarks on behalf of the staff, the town staff, and then I will propose that the hearing is for the appellate and the affected parties to provide to the board with information to the appeal, and the board must base its decision on planning merits. All speakers, please ensure that your comments and questions are directed to the board and through the board. All comments, of course, must be of proper decorum, succinct, and polite and to the point. If any person is referring to a written document, including a map, document, photographs, or report that is not already in the filed material or in the package we've provided, then please make sure those copies are left with the clerk. Once the board closes the public portion of the hearing and goes in camera private, all of that information that has been reviewed will be considered. The board will then provide a written decision on the matter within 15 days. Mr. Burkhardt, do you have any concerns with the process?
No, I don't have any concerns with the process. I don't know where to speak to this, but the only concern I would have is related to the subsequent requirement around construction and the time to construct, just given the state of the economy and the general delays that we see in supply chains. And so I don't want to be out of order, but I do want to make sure that point is recorded in the discussion today.
Okay, you can certainly make that point during your part of the discussion and presentation, and make it again if you like. I'd now ask that the development officer, Mr. Bjorga, and Mr. Henry make their presentation with respect to the appeal.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone, members of the board, and those watching via the town's live stream. My name is Eric Bjorgi. I'm a development officer and planning technician with the town, and I'm the development officer on this file. I do have a PowerPoint presentation which I'll share with you to run through the application. Okay, so this application is PL 2022-0047, and the location is 628 First Street. Starting with the statutory requirements, this slide has the timeline of events, starting with the refusal of the application, the notice of appeal being received by the town, the appeal hearing being scheduled, and the necessary notifications being sent out to adjacent neighbors as well as the appellant. Right. Okay, we're back in action. So to summarize the application before us today, it is a proposed addition to an existing detached dwelling, and specifically an attached garage and mudroom. The application includes a variance to the minimum rear yard setback. The application was refused due to the proposed variance to the rear yard setback being beyond the development officer's authority to consider under the provisions of the land use bylaw. So looking at some context, I guess, oriented on the property, this slide shows 628 First Street outlined in blue, and you can see the streets labeled surrounding. The zoning districts, you can see the heavy orange lines are the boundaries of the zoning districts. This property is within a R1 residential detached district with conservation of wildlands zone and public use below it, but the immediate vicinity is all R1 district. The policy context that we look at when reviewing this application, firstly, are the R1 district standards and the variance powers of the development authority. The municipal development plan does provide us some guidance on allowing for the gradual redevelopment and change in established neighborhoods. The Municipal Government Act provides us guidance on making decisions on discretionary uses, as well as decisions for the SDAB which do not conform to the land use bylaw. So getting into the specifics of the application, this slide shows a site plan and overhead view of the property. The existing dwelling is labeled under in the white color with the proposed addition at the rear of the property. You can see the lane labeled on the far left. And the garage and mudroom addition are outlined in orange. This is a current view of the property from the back lane, and this would be the area where the proposed addition would be located. So a similar view, this is the same view from the back lane, just from the plan set that was provided. So this would be the proposed view once the construction was complete as proposed. You can see the attached garage with the garage door on the left, and then the storage mudroom portion of the addition to the right. At this point, I want to point out, I believe the clerk has provided some printout copies to replace.
Actually, no, they haven't been distributed yet.
Oh.
No.
Okay.
So I can bring that up now if you want.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll maybe just explain. So
Okay.
on the development permit application, which is attachment 4, there was a mix-up on page 27 and 28. Somehow compiling the plan package, the drawings somehow got mixed up, and those 2 pages had been superseded. So we will provide the updated profile views of the plans to replace those pages of the application, but it's the images I'm showing here will illustrate what is the actual proposal that we're considering here. So you'll see in your plan package the storage portion of the addition was reduced in size somewhat.
Mr. Bjorga, could I just interrupt for a second,
Sure.
just to make sure I understand? Is the electronic copy up to date?
The agenda package that's online is not. We just discovered this this morning, but we did intend to distribute copies of those to update and clarify.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, just really quick, so those drawings have been circulated to the appellant, so they have copies. So because it is new information, the board would just need to accept it. You don't need to do a motion, but you can just state that you'll accept it as new information, and I can email it to all the board members right now, and then we can review it when we go into decision making.
Yeah, that would be appropriate.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank
Ms.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so these slides show the proposal. The attached garage is shown on the top image here to the right, and on the other view, which is the other side of the property, it's shown on the left. So those are the side views of the proposed addition. So reviewing this application for bylaw conformance, we found the full review of the application pertaining to the land use bylaw is found in attachment 3. And note that the storage mudroom portion of the addition is fully compliant with the land use bylaw. It is the attached garage portion of the application which does not comply. And that is because of the rear yard setback. Being attached to the house, part of the principal dwelling, it's required to meet a 7.5 meter rear yard setback. In this case, the proposed setback is 3.8 meters, which amounts to a 49.3% variance. Under the terms of the land use bylaw, the maximum a development officer can consider in a decision is 10%. And as a result, we were forced to refuse the application. So this slide illustrates the 7.5 meter rear yard setback line. As you can see, it roughly cuts halfway through the proposed attached garage. So everything to the left of that line is non-compliant with the land use bylaw. Everything on the right side would be the standard for a addition to a dwelling. So when we consider the variance that's being requested, we look at the intent of the rear yard setback regulation. And really that is to preserve open space and to preserve the open space of rear yards and therefore the enjoyment of amenity spaces for the residents as well as the surrounding residents. And considering that, it's important to note that the proposed garage, were it not attached to the house, were it separated as little as 6 inches or 1 foot, would be compliant with the bylaw, as accessory buildings are subject to different requirements. They're allowed to be within the rear yard, up to 1 meter from a side or rear property line. And that's allowing, that there is some limited development allowed in the rear yard, but the bylaw says that should only be in the form of accessory buildings. And in this case, the proposed addition in its size and its height is consistent with what's required for accessory buildings. So it is simply the fact that it's attached to the house that makes it non-compliant with the bylaw. So that all considered, in our opinion, the attachment or non-attachment of this building to the principal dwelling is somewhat arbitrary in its impact to adjacent properties, for example, given that you could have the same size of building located in that yard, separated by any distance from the principal dwelling. We also received messages of support from adjacent residents during the advertising stage of the application, which further reinforces that the use and enjoyment and value of neighboring properties would not be affected by this proposal. So that all considered, the planning department is making the recommendation to approve this application, despite the magnitude of the variance requested here. Our recommended conditions are included in attachment 6 to the report. And a reminder of the options for the SDAB in considering this application. May either approve, subject to administration's suggested conditions, approve subject to amended conditions, refuse the application, or postpone pending submission of any additional details. I'll now take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question, and it relates to trees, because we had a submission was received from a neighbor expressing concerns about removal of trees for that property and generally in South Calgary. And the conditions in Schedule A do refer to compliance with the tree protection bylaw, which I understand relates to town land. But are there any trees being removed on private land in this instance? And if so, is there any, what are the regulations that relate to that removal?
Right, so in our review of the application, we look specifically for trees on public land. There are no town bylaws that regulate trees that are on private land. So the condition in attachment 6 relating to the tree protection plan is a standard condition we put on all permits. In this case, a tree protection plan is not required since there are no trees on public property in the vicinity of the proposal, and any trees on the private property are not regulated by town bylaws, and the applicant is free to remove any if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Any further questions?
Not on that matter. I do have one other question.
Oh, please ask them away.
My other question just relates to the issue that the applicant raised at the beginning of this hearing when he introduced himself, and about the timing of commencement of construction. I didn't see anything in Schedule A, so I'm not really clear on what his issue is, and I don't know if you can provide some light on that.
Got that?
Yes, thanks for the question. So there is regulations within the land use bylaw, so under section 1.12. So with the approval of a development permit, and if you look in the Schedule A, there is a condition which states that the development is to comply with all regulations of the land use bylaw, unless otherwise specified. So I believe that's what he's referring to. So if you look at section 1.12 within land use bylaw, it does say there that the applicant has up to 1 year to commence development. But that said, though, if the applicant is not able until commence development within the 1 year, they have the right to apply for an extension, which is an agreement between the applicant and the town, which could grant them a longer time to commence development, which is, not uncommon, especially in this day and age, when supply and demand is fairly high and the resources are low. So if that is something that the applicant would like to pursue, we can do that, but we wouldn't actually, be writing that into the Schedule A. We just have to deal with it at the time of the 1 year or leading up to it, and just have them advise us whether or not they wanted that extension applied for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Thank you, Mr. Bell. Anything further? Mr. Scott.
Yes. I guess I'm, what should we say, a little concerned about the variance. Just in the respect, are we setting a precedent? When I'm looking at the photos, I see that the house next door would be, I guess, to the west. It has a double attached garage, and then when you look at the aerials, there's a whole number of them in the back alley that have double attached garages. But I would presume from where they are that they do not encroach on the setback on the alley. My question to you is this one of the first ones in town that we have a situation where the garage would encroach on a rear alley setback? And if so, are we setting a precedent? It's just a question.
Yes, thank you for the question. So we don't, as part of our review of permit applications and our preparation for appeals like this, we do not review appeal decision history. Every particular proposal is decided on its own merits. We don't consider precedent in other decisions to be a factor in our recommendations. So I can't answer the question whether this is the first attached garage that has encroached on a rear yard setback. But I would just say that any decisions are not binding on future decisions, and this should be considered on its own merit.
Thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Scott? Mr. Bjorgi, just one question on my review of the materials. I do notice that from between the garage and the mudroom, there is no door provided for. Are there no requirements for a fire door between that and the living space of the house?
So that would be a matter that would be addressed at the building permit stage. So after the decision on the development permit, if successful, the applicant would have to apply for a building permit. Things like separation between garages and the main living space is something that is a safety codes matter, but my understanding is that that barrier would be between the storage room and the main house, so that those separations would take place along that wall as the garage and the storage is one continuous space.
Thank you. And just following up on Mr. Scott's question, one other item that crossed my mind. In terms of how the bylaw has evolved, was the 7-meter setback there really to guide the placement of the original, the home itself? And because obviously the garage can be put within a meter, a separate garage. So I think was the control attempting to control the positioning of the main building rather than a garage?
Yes, the setbacks that you find in the district standards apply to the principal building on the site. So in this case, it's the home, the residence. So you could have a scenario, for example, where a attached garage has a second story on top. So in that case, it's clearly it's being built to the standard of the house versus just a garage. So it would be more important in that case to keep that building within the setbacks of the principal building because of its height, for example, which can be a lot higher as the house compared to a detached building, which must be shorter. So to answer your question, yes, those setbacks are intended for the house itself, which attached garages are often a part of.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That completes the board's questions. Thank you. Now, Mr. Burkhart, I would ask that you make your presentation to the board.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank the chair and the members of the committee, as well as the staff today for taking the time. It's a tremendous amount of work, and I'd particularly like to single out Mr. Bjorgi as we work through this process in a very professional and time-efficient fashion. So I'd just like to acknowledge the contribution by the community at this point. When I looked at this project, I think for us the puzzle was we can build a detached garage, and it would sit on the property line on the alley, or a 1.5 meter setback from the alley, and then we would be left with a very narrow strip of land between the garage and the house. And I think, as it was shown in the drawings and it was pointed out, that really with the same mass of the detached garage, the building seems to make more sense from a number of perspectives. The building attached to the garage, or attached to the rear of the house, seems to make sense from a number of perspectives. And they were touched on. I'd just like to maybe point them out from our perspective. And really, I think that what we're trying to do is maximize the utility, not just of our property, but the utility and aesthetic appeal that moving a building of that mass against the house offers the community as you walk down the alley. And I think that the last several years, we've seen significant focus on accessory dwelling unit building guidelines and really enhancing the alleyway and offering the residents of the community alternative ways to increase not only the utility of the building, but to increase the aesthetic and experience when you walk down alleys, and not only in South Canmore, but throughout the town of Canmore. So I acknowledge the town's commitment to that. I think that this proposal is aligned with that commitment. I think it enhances the public space. It improves emergency access. It enhances sight lines, allows more sunlight. The vegetation benefits from these modifications to structure. So from that perspective, we think there's a very, very strong reason to attach an otherwise detached garage to the house. A couple of comments specifically about the trees in South Canmore. I think that's probably one of the charms that the community offers, not only residents, but visitors to the community, is the greenery, the density of the trees. And we have one tree that I dare say we feel is probably one of the most beautiful aspects of the yard. And you probably noticed it in the picture of the back of the house. And the reason we've lived there for a number of years, we bought the property 10 or 11 years ago, and we haven't done anything now. We're just at that point where we're looking to retire. So a garage, I'm going to need a garage to keep my bikes in and keep my car warm. But we've delayed this for many years because we are sensitive to the elements that members of the community speak to, specifically around trees and taking down trees. Regrettably, this tree is situated in almost center in the back of the yard, so it will have to come down. But what we'd like to do is take the tree down when there are no birds nesting in the tree, just to minimize the impact of the local birds. And unfortunately, it will have to come down, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we sympathize with that value. We strongly support it, but we'll take care to remove the tree when there is no or minimal impact to the birds in the community. So in closing, we believe that approving the variance and allowing construction of an attached garage will improve the public space and minimize the waste of personal spaces, which we believe is a benefit to the community, our neighbors, and to us. It'll minimize the building mass on offsetting neighbors. It'll improve the visual and aesthetic impact for neighbors or pedestrians walking in the alley, and allow us to maximize utility of the garage in our home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. Questions? Mr. Bell? No questions? Mr. Scott? I think that then does conclude the board's matter. I wonder then if we could turn to closing remarks. Mr. Bjorga, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I won't reiterate what I presented unless there are any further questions that the board has. I'll leave my presentation what it is. Thank you.
So there was nothing from Mr. Bjorga's presentation that you were wanting to clarify. Okay, thank you. Mr. Bjorga, Mr. Burkhardt, any other comments that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think my comments were exactly as we have heartfelt as they are, as we see things. I would like to thank the member for clarifying the right to apply on the extension of the building construction window. I wasn't aware that was a possibility, so that satisfies my question on that topic. So thank you for taking time to respond to that question.
Thank you, Mr. Burkhardt. Just before we close, I just have to ask the question, do you feel you've had an adequate opportunity to present your case?
Oh, yeah, I'd say 10 out of 10.
Thank you for that. This hearing is now concluded, and in accordance with the provincial legislation, we will render a decision within 15 days of today's date. And of course, no decision is binding until the board issues the written decision. There's nothing else, I don't believe, Ms. Browse?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were just 2 letters that were received that were in the SDAB package one was in support and one was neutral, but other than that, that's everything.
Yeah,
Yes.